When my sister Jenna told me she was pregnant for the 5th time, I felt my blood boil. I'm done raising her kids, and something had to change. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. I'm Clara Whitman, 28, working 2 jobs just to keep myself afloat while raising Jenna's children, and honestly, I've reached my limit. Every time she smiled and fluttered her eyelashes, she somehow convinced everyone she was the perfect sister, the perfect mother, the golden child, while I disappeared in the background, exhausted, invisible, and resentful. Jenna, 32, was charming, manipulative, and had mastered the art of relying on me for everything. Babysitting, school runs, doctor visits, and even paying for things she couldn't manage herself. My life had become her support system, and my sacrifices were taken for granted. I'd spent nights lying awake while her children screamed in the next room because she overslept yet again, and mornings rushing to get them ready for school while she got her coffee and gossip time. I loved my nieces and nephews, Mason, Lily, Harper, and Eli, but I couldn't keep losing myself for their sake, especially when Jenna repeatedly ignored her responsibilities. That morning, when she announced the new pregnancy over breakfast, I felt a mix of anger, exhaustion, and determination. Something inside me snapped. I couldn't allow this cycle to continue. I started thinking about ways to reclaim my life without abandoning the children I cared for. I couldn't tell anyone yet. Jenna's charm had everyone wrapped around her finger. But I knew I had to be strategic. I thought about boundaries I had never set before, about planning my exit from being the family's unpaid servant. Maybe it was time to stop being manipulated. Maybe it was finally time to assert control over my life, to take back my freedom without betraying the kids I loved. And that's when the plan began to form, quiet and deliberate, in the back of my mind, like a spark ready to ignite. The frustration, the betrayal, the exhaustion. I refused to let them define me any longer. This was the beginning of the fight for my life, and for the respect I had been denied for too long. Years of carrying Jenna's burdens had left me drained in ways no one seemed to notice. Mason, Lily, Harper, and little Eli depended on me constantly, and I had been the one to navigate tantrums, homework meltdowns, and scraped knees while juggling 2 demanding jobs. Every opportunity one had at work slipped through my fingers. Promotions I deserved, overtime that could have built my savings, because I was always the one running back home, patching up Jenna's chaos. My evenings were swallowed by school projects, doctor appointments, and endless meals for 4 growing kids, leaving no room for friends, hobbies, or even a moment to breathe. Even when exhaustion hit me like a wall, my parents, Richard and Elaine, would shrug it off or side with Jenna, praising her for managing it all, while I silently suffered. They couldn't see, or perhaps refused to see, that their golden daughter thrived because I carried the weight of her choices. Over time, the resentment grew, sharp and steady, until I finally recognized the pattern. I had been exploited, taken for granted, and erased from my own life while Jenna flourished. It was painful, but clarity emerged from the chaos. I began noting the little cracks in her parenting, missed payments, forgotten appointments, moments of neglect, everything I could quietly record without raising suspicion. Each detail became a piece of evidence, a quiet rebellion forming in my mind. The anger simmered beneath the surface, mixing with a determination I hadn't felt before. I realized this wasn't just about exhaustion. It was about reclaiming my life and making sure she couldn't continue treating me as her safety net. The first steps toward revenge were subtle, keeping records, observing patterns, and understanding how I could finally leverage the truth when the time came. For years, I had been invisible, but now I was preparing to step out of the shadows, armed with knowledge and a quiet resolve. The burden had shaped me, hardened me, and ultimately, given me the clarity to see a path forward. One where I would no longer be the unpaid caretaker of someone else's irresponsibility. The morning Jenna announced her 5th pregnancy, she did it with her usual flair, turning a simple brunch into a celebration of herself. Everyone clapped and cooed, while I felt a tight knot of anger in my chest, my patience snapping for the first time in years. I couldn't hold back. Words flew before I even thought, sharp and raw, telling her how reckless and unfair it was to keep relying on me. But no one heard me. Jenna laughed it off, flashing that disarming smile that always worked on everyone but me. My parents quickly jumped in, scolding me for being too harsh while defending her choices, twisting my frustration into guilt. Jenna's manipulation was flawless. She painted me as ungrateful, selfish, and cold-hearted, and even I felt my anger momentarily waver under their judgment. That day, I realized I could no longer be the family's default caretaker, their emotional punching bag, or the person everyone assumed would always be there to clean up the mess. I refused to keep sacrificing my mental health, my career, and my future for someone else's irresponsibility. While everyone else celebrated, a determination settled in me like a seed ready to grow. I began thinking in strategies, quietly mapping out how to set boundaries, protect my time, and regain control over my life. It wasn't about punishment at first. It was about survival, about reclaiming agency that had been stolen from me for too long. But as the hours passed, I couldn't deny the satisfaction of imagining her finally facing consequences, just a fraction of what I had endured. Every smile she threw around, every praise from my parents, only fueled my resolve. I knew the path ahead would require patience, planning, and cunning, but for the first time in years, I felt a spark of power. This brunch wasn't just another day of frustration. It was the turning point. I could no longer stand silently while my energy and love were exploited. Quietly, I began plotting, determined to take back the life that had been quietly slipping through my fingers, and to ensure Jenna finally learned that her reliance on me would no longer be limitless. I started paying closer attention to Jenna's routines, quietly observing how she managed her finances and her kids. It didn't take long to see patterns I had ignored before. Overdrawn accounts, unpaid utility bills, missed doctor appointments, and times when the children were left unsupervised for hours. Each incident gnawed at me, but instead of reacting immediately, I began recording every detail, keeping notes and photos tucked away where Jenna would never notice. I wanted undeniable proof, something concrete to show that her carelessness wasn't just frustrating, it was harmful. Around this time, I reached out to Mark Reynolds, a trusted lawyer friend, explaining my predicament without revealing too much. He listened carefully and outlined options I had for temporary guardianship or other legal measures that could protect the kids if things escalated. Hearing that there were legitimate ways to shield the children while reclaiming my autonomy gave me a quiet hope I hadn't felt in years. Still, my mind wrestled with guilt and responsibility. I adored Mason, Lily, Harper, and Eli, and the thought of taking steps that might upset Jenna tore at me. Yet the realization was undeniable. I could no longer allow myself to be a pawn in her careless games. Every time I documented another oversight, like leaving Harper alone in the yard or forgetting to refill Eli's medication, I felt a mix of sorrow and empowerment. The evidence piled up silently, a shield I could wield if needed. I knew that love didn't mean sacrificing myself indefinitely, and that the children's well-being depended on someone capable stepping in. Mark's guidance clarified that this wasn't betrayal, it was responsibility. I started imagining how to approach the situation strategically, balancing my attachment to the kids with the necessity of enforcing boundaries with Jenna. The more I observed, the more I understood that reclaiming control over my life didn't mean abandoning those I cared about. Instead, it meant ensuring they were safe while I rebuilt my freedom. Each note I wrote, each overlooked bill I documented, and each risky moment I captured became a step toward a plan that would finally put me in charge of my own life. I finally decided it was time to speak directly to Jenna, away from prying eyes. I asked her to sit down with me in the quiet of the living room, my voice steady but firm as I told her I could no longer manage her household or her children's needs. Instead of hearing me, she twisted my words, accusing me of being cold, selfish, and unwilling to help family. Her tone was sharp, practiced, designed to make me doubt myself, but I refused to react emotionally. I let her rant, letting the anger simmer in silence while I hinted, carefully, that I had collected evidence of her repeated negligence and that ignoring responsibility would have consequences. The weight of those words hung in the air, subtle but unmistakable, like a quiet storm building strength. Before the conversation could go further, my parents appeared, scolding me for being too dramatic and praising Jenna for her family dedication, as though my limits were unreasonable. That intervention made one thing painfully clear. I couldn't count on them to see the truth or back me up. Every instinct I had about being fair and open with them crumbled. They were firmly in Jenna's corner, and their opinion no longer mattered. In that moment, I understood that any action I took had to be calculated, personal, and deliberate. I couldn't rely on appeals to sympathy, guilt, or family loyalty anymore. Instead, I had to create a plan that combined strategy, timing, and proof, ensuring Jenna would face the results of her choices without needing anyone else to intervene. As I left the room, calm on the surface but resolute inside, a sense of clarity settled over me. The confrontation wasn't about winning an argument. It was about reclaiming control, marking the first real step in a process I had been preparing for quietly. From that point on, every move had to be precise. The lesson I intended for Jenna had to be undeniable, unavoidable, and entirely on my terms. I began implementing small but firm changes in my daily life, declining last-minute babysitting requests and setting clear limits on money I would lend or spend on Jenna's whims. Predictably, she tried every tactic in her arsenal. Dramatic guilt trips, invented emergencies, and veiled threats meant to make me feel responsible for every inconvenience she created. Instead of yielding, I stayed composed, quietly adjusting routines to protect both myself and the children. I enrolled Mason, Lily, Harper, and Eli in classes and programs I could afford, ensuring their schedules were full and structured, subtly reducing the opportunities for Jenna to manipulate me without abandoning them. Each enrollment, each payment, and each carefully planned activity was recorded meticulously, creating a quiet trail of accountability. At night, when I reviewed the notes, the tension twisted in my chest. Guilt over seeming cold to Jenna mingled with a growing sense of control. I realized I could protect the children without sacrificing my own well-being, and that realization brought a strange relief, like breathing after being underwater for too long. With each small boundary I enforced, I felt the balance shift, power slowly returning to my hands. The emotional tug-of-war never stopped. Jenna's attempts to provoke me continued, but they were met with measured responses instead of panic. I could feel the first real signs of independence taking root, the knowledge that I was no longer her default solution. The act of documenting everything gave me a hidden strength, a silent weapon I carried while outwardly maintaining calm. Each choice, each refusal, each recorded misstep built the foundation for a larger plan, one that promised clarity, justice, and a path to freedom. Despite the guilt that occasionally crept in, I felt invigorated, ready to continue the difficult work of reclaiming my life, while still ensuring the children remained safe and cared for. For the first time, it felt like I was steering my own story, no longer a passenger in someone else's recklessness. I carefully orchestrated moments where Jenna's careless habits couldn't be ignored, making sure her missteps became visible to everyone without looking like I was setting a trap. One afternoon, she skipped an essential parent-teacher meeting for her newest child, leaving me to explain, apologize, and manage the situation in front of the school staff and a few family friends who had come to support her. I stayed calm and collected, handling the chaos while letting the consequences naturally unfold, knowing that her negligence was now undeniable. Slowly, my parents' eyes began to open to the reality of how much I had been doing behind the scenes, how I had been carrying the weight she refused to bear. The shift was subtle but noticeable. Their praise and attention moved from Jenna to me in quiet acknowledgement of the sacrifices I had made for years. I made sure to drop hints, carefully worded and measured, that I would no longer tolerate being exploited, and that legal boundaries might be enforced if Jenna refused to take responsibility seriously. She began showing signs of panic and frustration, flustered by the sudden transparency of her choices and the diminishing control she had over me. For the first time in years, I saw her scramble, her confident mask cracking as she realized her manipulations were losing their effect. It was empowering, knowing that my patience and planning were working, that the subtle exposure of her actions was starting to shift the family dynamic. I felt a mix of relief and satisfaction. Relief that the children's well-being was being noticed, and satisfaction that Jenna's influence was waning. The turning point was tangible. I was no longer invisible, and her ability to dictate my actions was slipping. Each moment of exposure strengthened my position and clarified the boundaries I intended to maintain, setting the stage for the next steps in reclaiming control over my life and the children's environment. Jenna's uncertainty and mounting stress confirmed that the strategy was working. The tension reached a peak when I knew words and subtle hints were no longer enough. I contacted Mark again, explaining that immediate steps were necessary to ensure both my stability and the children's safety. Together, we filed for temporary guardianship during critical periods, giving me the authority to make decisions without interference while protecting the kids from unpredictable situations. When Jenna discovered the paperwork, panic flashed across her face. Her usual confidence faltered, replaced by fear and disbelief. She realized, too late, that the control she had always held over me was slipping, that her manipulations no longer carried the same power. My parents were forced to confront the evidence I had quietly amassed, torn between loyalty to Jenna and the undeniable proof of her negligence. They looked conflicted, guilt shadowing their faces, but the documentation left them little choice. In those moments, I felt an unexpected lightness, a clarity I hadn't experienced in years. For the first time, I recognized that I wasn't being crushed by obligations I hadn't agreed to, that I could love my nieces and nephews without surrendering my identity. My internal voice whispered a truth I had long ignored. Freedom wasn't about abandoning family. It was about refusing to be their punching bag any longer. Every fear I had felt about confrontation, about anger, about standing up to Jenna, began to fade under the weight of action. I was no longer trapped in the cycle of endless sacrifice and guilt. The children remained safe, the family dynamic was shifting, and I felt a sense of empowerment unlike anything before. It wasn't vengeance in the cruel sense, but justice for years of being manipulated and overlooked. The clarity settled in me. Boundaries could be enforced, love could coexist with self-respect, and my life could finally be my own. In that charged atmosphere, I understood that the battle for autonomy had only just begun, but for the first time, I felt in control and free. With the legal measures in place, I made it clear that Jenna had to face real consequences for years of carelessness. She was required to attend parenting classes, contribute financially to her children's needs, and adhere to schedules I set, or risk losing temporary custody entirely. I enforced these rules firmly, creating structure while still showing love and attention to Mason, Lily, Harper, and Eli. Watching Jenna attempt her usual manipulations only to have them fail was quietly satisfying. Her charm and excuses held no weight against the boundaries I had established. For the first time in a long while, I felt the relief of control, a sense of order replacing the constant chaos I had endured. With this structure in place, I began redirecting my energy toward my own life, pursuing career opportunities, reconnecting with friends, and carving out time for personal growth that had been impossible before. Every step I took toward my independence reinforced that the balance of power had shifted. Jenna's frustration became visible in subtle gestures, hesitation, defensive tones, and moments of awkward realization. As she came to understand that she could no longer manipulate me or assume I would always bail her out. That humiliation was silent but powerful, a testament to the patience and planning I had invested over months. While I maintained care and warmth for the children, I no longer let guilt dictate my actions or diminish my boundaries. The freedom I had gained wasn't about punishment, but about reclaiming my life with dignity and purpose. I could love without being exploited, guide without being burdened, and nurture without losing myself. Jenna's dependence on my sacrifices had been exposed for what it was, and her realization that she could no longer take advantage of me marked the turning point in our relationship. The family dynamic had shifted permanently, and I finally experienced the quiet satisfaction of justice. Not through vengeance, but through standing firm, protecting those who mattered, and restoring my own peace of mind. For the first time, I felt truly in control of my life and my future. Looking back, the path I walked was exhausting and filled with quiet betrayals, but it brought a clarity I had never known. Every boundary I set, every limit I enforced, forced the family to acknowledge the weight of my sacrifices and the years I had spent shouldering responsibilities that weren't mine alone. Jenna faced lessons she could no longer dodge, learning accountability in ways that were uncomfortable but necessary. I continued to love Mason, Lily, Harper, and Eli deeply, yet my care was no longer intertwined with self-erasure. I had discovered that affection doesn't require surrendering one's identity, and that enforcing limits can coexist with genuine concern. The transformation within me was profound. Exhaustion turned into empowerment, frustration into strategy, and guilt into the confidence to prioritize my own life while still supporting those who mattered. The journey proved that standing up for yourself is sometimes the only way to protect both your heart and your sanity. Betrayal can leave scars, but self-respect and courage have the power to heal, to redefine relationships, and to show that love doesn't demand sacrificing oneself entirely. I walked away from the cycle of manipulation not with bitterness, but with a renewed sense of purpose, understanding that protecting your peace can be the truest act of devotion. Do you think I did the right thing by finally standing up to my sister, or should I have kept helping her? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you want more stories like this, subscribe and turn on notifications.